Okay, today we're going to talk about how to graph inverse functions. So yesterday I showed you on the calculator what the inverse function looks like. It's a reflection of the original equation or line, whatever you're graphing. Today we're going to practice doing it based on a table value. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look at some notes. You need to fill in these notes, the parts that are missing on your notes. Let me change my color real quick. Okay, so graphing inverse function. So you first generate a table of your original function values. Alright, so say you are given a line, you need to find a table of values. You can use your calculator or you can do it in your head. Alright, then, same as we were doing yesterday, we're going to switch the x and the y. So in this table you can see, we started with -2, -6, and the inverse of that would be -6, -2. Now we learned that it's because we switched the x and y and solved for y, you're basically reversing what you started with. Alright? The new table is your inverse, so this would be my inverse function. And it doesn't always come out to be a function. Alright, remember that if we have something that's a parabola, it's a function because it passes the vertical line test. But a sideways parabola does not pass the vertical line test, and therefore it is not a function. So if we get something like that, we kind of have to think about how can we make it a function. Okay? So let's do an example. So we're given graph the function in its inverse, and we're told that this is f of x. So we're going to do f of x, and we're going to create a table. Now I chose values already so that I can not have to sit here and do it. You can get values from your calculator, or you can get values by just choosing any x's and plugging it into the equation. Okay, but I went ahead and did it ahead of time so that I can not make this video so long. Alright, so that's my original function. Let's go ahead and graph this to see what it looks like. Now, it's a linear function, so it should look like a line. So I'm going to go to -4 down to -6 and put a dot. I'm going to go -2 to -5 and put a dot. At 0, I'm going to be at -4. At 2, I'm at -3, and at 4, I'm at -2. So my line of my original function looks like that. So that is f of x. Okay? Now I'm going to change colors so that you can see what the inverse function looks like. Okay, so remember that we say the inverse of x, we write it with a -1 sign. So I'm going to, instead of coming up with the equation and solving it algebraically, all I'm going to do is reverse these numbers in the table. So I'm going to say -6, -4, -5, -2, -4, 0, -3, 2, and -2, 4. I'll just switch them. Now, always write this out, because when you go to graph it, you can get real confused real fast. So make sure you write it out so you know you're reading from this table. So I'm going to go -6 to -4 and put a dot. I'm going to go -5 to -2 and put a dot. -4 and 0. -3 and 2. And then -2 and 4. So my inverse function looks like this. I'm going to keep going down like that. Okay, so that's f inverse of x. Now, if you notice, what you're doing, ultimately, there's this line y equals x that goes through the center of the graph. Splits the coordinates in half. What you're doing is you're reflecting the original problem across that line. And that's why we switch the y and the x. So it causes it to flip across the y equals x line. Okay? We're going to practice this more tomorrow, but let's do one more example. So, in this case, we have a quadratic because it's x squared minus 4. So we're going to start by doing our original function. Maybe, if it'll let me click on it. Original is in blue. You know, technology really sometimes just irritates me to death. Let's click on that. Blue. No, is it going to write in blue? No. Alright, well this time the original function is going to be in red. So we have f of x is the original function. So I'm going to come up with a table of values. I've already done that, so I know it's negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. I just chose x values. That's where those numbers come from. Then I plugged them in, and I got 0, negative 3, negative 4, negative 3, and 0. So remember that this is my vertex, right? Reviewed from the previous times. Okay, so then let's find let's go ahead and graph that actually. So we're going to graph that. So we go negative 2, 0, negative 1, negative 3, 0, negative 4, and then it repeats on the other side. So I have this lovely parabola, quadratic function. Okay? Then my new function, if this thing will let me change colors, we're going to do it, of course now it does, we're going to do it in blue. Okay, so my inverse function this time is in blue. I'm sorry for the confusion, but my computer hates me. So I switched the x's and the y's. So I got 0, negative 2, negative 3, negative 1, negative 4, 0, negative 3, 1, and 0, and 2. Okay, so we're going to graph those functions, or those points now. So I come over here, I'm going 0, negative 2, negative 3, negative 1, negative 4, 0, negative 3, positive 1, so it'll be right there, and 0, 2. So my inverse function looks like this. Okay, now this was a little bit harder to see because it didn't sit at the axis, but if I draw the line y equals x, it's a reflection across that which you learned about in geometry. Alright, now the new function is not really a function, right? It doesn't pass the vertical line test. So to deal with that, we restrict the domain. So for this, our domain has to be from negative 4 to positive infinity. I mean, not our domain. Yeah, our domain would be from negative 4 to infinity, right? But our range, it has to be restricted because I don't want any of these negative numbers. That's going to cause it to be not a function. So I'm going to take the range from 0 to infinity. Okay, now this part right here, that's not really what we're worried about today. We're really worried about just getting the concept of switching the x and the y. But just so you know, that's coming next. So get excited. Alright, that was a long video, and if you're confused, that's okay. We're going to work on this tomorrow in class. But make sure you took notes, and make sure you filled in your notes. Remember that your notes are what helps you study for your test. If you don't study, then you fail. Alright? Have a good night.